Budgeting. Everyone hears this and thinks that it's something that takes your freedom away and makes your life more restrictive. You imagine that every single cent have to be budgeted for a purpose. And you ask yourself, why can't I have more freedom over my money and just spend on anything I want? Well, I'm here to tell you that even the richest person that seem to be able to buy anything they want perform some form of budgeting strategy. And those that don't, what you see is probably just a facade, and they are probably not doing as well as you thought in terms of wealth accumulation to achieve financial freedom. Budgeting does not take away your freedom. In fact, it gives you the freedom to live life to the fullest. The last thing you want is to reach a point where your freedom is really taken away as a result of a mountain of debt because you refuse to learn how to budget, when in actual fact, the money you are getting could be more than enough for you to live your life. Budgeting gives you freedom and is the gateway for you to reach your financial goal. In this video, I'll share with you a budgeting strategy that's a little different from others. You don't have to budget every single category possible in the dictionary. All you need to do is budget for the key categories. I call this the obligations first strategy. This is a strategy where you budget your available expenses after setting aside your non-negotiable obligatory expenses. Here's the very first step on how to start budgeting like a pro and save towards your first 100k with this strategy. Start tracking your expenses. There are many methods to track your expenses, but one method I would like to recommend is to use the numerous budgeting tracking apps available on your phone's app store. Personally, I'm using an app called Monify, which allows me to categorize each of my expenses and displays them all on an easy to understand pie chart. You can even create new categories based on your own preference. Some examples of the categories that I have are eating out, food and drinks, which I like to refer to food that I eat on the go or groceries, gifts, bills, entertainment such as movies, and travel. You can categorize your expenses however you want, but the purpose of tracking your expenses is to get an idea on where your money is flowing to. More often times, people find it hard to budget and save money because they have no idea where their money is flowing to. By tracking your expenses down, you'll know where your money is being spent at, and you can work towards decreasing the category that has the highest expenditure. The next step is to identify your non-negotiable obligations. Out of the many categories that you're tracking in your budgeting app, there should be a few categories that are obligations that you must pay no matter what. Some of these obligations that I have are my insurance, taxes, bills, allowance for my parents, investments, and my personal cash savings. Once you have identified your non-negotiable obligations, here's where the fun begins for the obligations first strategy. Write down how much you're spending on each of these categories every month. In this example, I'll use an example of a recent university graduate, John, who has a take-home pay of $3,000. John has a monthly insurance obligation of $180 per month. He also has to pay his taxes, which he has to save approximately $200 every month to eventually pay for it at the end of the financial year. He has to pay for bills, which is only $20 every month for his phone bills. He lives with his parents, so he doesn't need to pay rent. However, he still gives both his parents allowance, amounting to $800 in total. John knows the importance of investing early to eventually become financially independent. Thus, he sets aside $300 every month to invest. Based on his budget tracking app, if he were to exclude all these non-negotiable obligations from his total expenditure, he spends an average of $1,800 on food, shopping, and other miscellaneous expenditures. However, John is doing something wrong. He brings home $3,000 every month from his day job, but he's spending a total of $3,300, which means that the money he has saved up previously is depleting at a rate of $300 every month. He thought he's saving. After all, he made a mental note to save $500 every month. However, because all of his expenditure and savings are done using the same account, he has no idea when he can spend and when he can't. Eventually, he reached a point where he won't even be able to pay for his monthly obligations. With the challenge John is facing in mind, the next step on how to budget like a pro and solve his problem is to create a bank account for each of these obligatory expenditure types. For example, you should have a bank account that collects your income every month. One for your insurance, one for your taxes, one for your bills, one for your allowances to your parents if you do provide for them, one for investments, and lastly, one for your personal cash savings. Everyone has different non-negotiable obligations. Thus, if you need to create more or a different one, just create. But keep in mind that you shouldn't open too many, otherwise it gets too overwhelming to keep track. An appropriate number of accounts should be 5 to 7. Ideally, each of these accounts should be open on the same banking app, where it's easily viewable at a glance, have no minimum balance required, and easy to open. The only exception is your personal savings account, where I would recommend you to open at a different bank to limit the number of times you look at it. the next step is to set up a standing instruction for each of these accounts. A standing instruction is basically an instruction to the bank to transfer a certain amount of money to another bank account on a monthly basis. Some bank accounts do not require you to set up standing instructions, as it already asks you how much you would like to transfer to it every month when you create the account. If your bank doesn't have this feature, you have to research on how to set up one. The idea of this step is that you're only allowed to use each of these accounts for what it's meant for. If you have to pay your bills, you can only tap into your bills account. If you have to pay for your insurance, you can only tap into your insurance account. In no circumstance should you tap into these accounts to pay for other things, such as money from your tax account to pay for your bills. Going back to John's example, if he were to open a separate account for each of these obligatory expenditure, his account should look something like this, where he should have $1,000 left in his daily expenditure account. You can see this in two ways. Some people will think that budgeting limits your freedom, as you'll only be able to spend $1,000 every month when your take-home pay is a whole $3,000. But if you look at it the other way, it can also mean that you have $1,000 to spend on anything you want, while ensuring that your obligatory expenses are kept intact. If you were to spend without budgeting, you'll eventually reach a point where life takes away your freedom because of the debt you got yourself into. So, how does John decrease his daily expenditure to fit below $1,000? That's where the budget tracking app comes in handy again. He can look at his app and see where most of his money are flowing to. In this case, he's spending a lot of money eating at nice restaurants every day. All he needs to do is eat at cheaper places, or go home more often to eat what his parents cook for him. Enjoying life doesn't mean that you have to spend a lot of money. More often times, the cheaper alternatives can bring you as much joy or even more. If you have been following this strategy closely, you'll notice one unique thing compared to other budgeting strategies. The examples are all given in terms of cash amounts, not percentages. There are many budgeting strategies out there, such as the 50-30-20 rule, where you spend 50% of your pay on needs, 30% on wants, and 20% on savings. It's definitely a good strategy to start with. However, one downside to such strategy is that if your pay were to increase, which I hope you have that ambitious outlook, is that it unconsciously tells you to spend more when you don't need to. For example, if you're averaging at $2,000 per month on wants and needs, and you're doing fine, by following this rule, you're telling yourself to spend more than $2,000 as your pay increases when you don't even need to. Yes, your savings will also increase based on the 20% rule, but if you continue to follow your $2,000 on wants and needs while your pay is increasing, you'll be able to accumulate wealth at a much faster rate for you to reach your financial goals. For the obligations first strategy, it does just that, where expenses that can be kept constant should be kept constant, while the percentage of your wealth accumulation categories kept increasing as your income increases. A rule of thumb is to minimally set aside 20% of your take-home income for wealth accumulation, such as your cash savings and investments. For example, all your other expenditure types excluding your cash savings and investments amounts to $1,500, which is just 50% of your take-home income of $3,000. This means that you can save 50% for wealth accumulation, where its percentage will keep increasing as your income increases. But note that it should never go below 20%. If it does, you have to do something about your expenses to bring that number up. Here are two case studies for you to better understand on how to use this obligations first strategy. For the first case study, Max is a manager at a restaurant, bringing him a take-home income of $4,000 per month. To employ this obligations first strategy, he has identified his non-negotiable obligations: bills, which includes his mortgage and utilities, taxes, investments, and cash savings. He has to pay $2,000 in total for bills every month, $200 for taxes, $500 for investments, and $1,000 for savings. This leaves him just $300 left for his daily expenses, which is definitely not enough based on his monthly tracker. He can't decrease his bills as it's a fixed obligation, unless he downgrades his house further, and he can't decrease his $200 every month to prep for his tax payments at the end of the year. The only thing that he can change is his investment and cash savings obligations. Following the 20% savings rule, which includes investments and cash savings, he can afford to decrease either one or both, as both his investment and cash savings amounts to 37.5% of his take-home income. He can afford to decrease it by 17.5%, which amounts to $700. However, he wants to be a little aggressive on saving towards his financial freedom. Thus, he decides to only decrease his investment and savings by $500 instead of $700. This brings his total available expenses to $800 to spend on his daily needs. In the next case study, Katie is a recent university graduate that just started her first job. She brings home a take-home income of $3,000. She has identified her non-negotiable obligations, which are taxes, cash savings, and allowance to parents. However, Katie loves to travel and feels that life without traveling is life without meaning. So, she has identified another non-negotiable obligation called travel. With that, she has to pay $200 for taxes, $200 for cash savings, $300 for allowance to parents, and $300 for travel. This gives her a total of $2,000 for her to spend on her daily needs. However, based on the 20% savings rule, her $200 savings is way too low, amounting to only approximately 7% of her take-home pay. She increases her cash savings to 20%, which is $600, giving her $1,600 left for her daily expenses. Based on her budget tracking app, she spends an average of $2,000, which is more than her available money for daily expenses. This means that if she don't make any changes to her daily expenses in the following month, she will be going into the negative. However, she also wants to travel more often, and saving $300 per month for travel will not be sufficient based on her calculations. She decides to increase her allocations for travel to $500 per month. With that, she has $1,400 left available for her daily expenditures, which she will have to stick to. How could she work towards decreasing from $2,000 to $1,400 to spend on her daily needs? Well, she either has to cut down on her shopping or eat at cheaper places. If she's able to bring that number even lower than $1,400, it basically means that she has more money to put towards her non-negotiable obligations in the future. To summarize, the obligations first budgeting strategy is made up of a few simple steps. Start tracking your expenses, identify your non-negotiable obligations, create separate accounts for each of these obligations, set up standing instructions to draw money from your main account into each of these separate accounts automatically on a monthly basis, and ensure at least 20% of your take-home income are allocated towards wealth accumulation, such as savings and investments. If you want to be aggressive towards wealth accumulation, you just have to increase the percentage of your income going towards your savings and decrease your daily expenses. The word budgeting has gotten a bad reputation, where people feel that it restricts your freedom in spending on things that you love, when in actual fact, it gives you control over your life and allows you to spend on whatever you want, guilt-free, provided you have followed all the budgeting steps that I've taught in this video. You don't have to do any calculations after you set up all your accounts. If you need to pay your bills, you just have to tap into your bills account. If you need to pay for your insurance, you just have to withdraw from your insurance account. You don't have to worry that you'll be tapping into your savings while you pay for all these obligations, and you'll also be able to see visible progress of your savings account as it's in an entirely different account compared to having all these expenditures done on the same account. By having an account purely for your daily expenses, it basically means that you can spend on whatever you want with the money inside. If you want to take it another step further and draw the line properly between leisure and daily necessities such as food, you can make a separate account purely for such activity. With that said, whatever money you've decided to put inside your leisure expenditure account, it's entirely up to you to spend it all guilt-free. You don't have to worry about saving more money when using money inside your leisure account, because you have already got a savings account that draws a minimum of 20% of your income or more into it. You won't have to stress anymore about paying bills. All you need to do is to put in the initial effort to set up all these accounts upon proper planning, and freedom is in your hands.